I'm trying with my own phone. Peace and power. Peace and power, family. Peace and power. Greetings. Let me see. Hopefully this, ooh, that's bright. Give me a minute. Alright. Don't let me broadcast. Usually let me go from my phone, so this should be interesting. Alright, hold on. Alright, disclaimer. Yeah, I'm gonna probably butcher a lot of the words and names. Peace, either free, peace and power, peace and power. Like I said, none of these are words or names that I'm accustomed to hearing, so I'm probably gonna stumble through them, but that's peace and power though. You still gonna catch this work. Alright, so let's start with this here on the back. Things Fall Apart is the first of 3 novels in Chinua Achebe's critically acclaimed African trilogy. It is a classic narrative about Africa's cataclysmic encounter with Europe as it establishes a colonial presence on the continent. Told through the fictional experiences of Okonkwo, a wealthy and fearless Igbo warrior of Umuofia in the late 1800s, Things Fall Apart explores one man's futile resistance to the devaluing of his Igbo traditions by British political and religious forces and his despair as his community capitulates to the powerful new order. All right, so more than 20 copies sold. Things Fall Apart provides one of the most illuminating and permanent monuments to the African experience. Achebe does not only capture life in a pre-colonial African village, he conveys the tragedy of the loss of that world while broadening our understanding of our contemporary realities. Look at there. Who knew? All right, here we go. Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe. All right. He passed in 2013. All right. Things Fall Apart. It opens with a quote by W.B. Yeats from The Second Coming. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. All right, here we go. Part 1, Chapter 1. Let me need some copyright info. Copyright 1959 by Chinua Achebe, right? Copyright 1959. So, I ain't write it. I'm not trying to get no money from it. I just want to read this power to you. Peace and power. Peace and power. I love you. Oh, that's a pretty picture, too. All right, here we go. Chapter 1. Okonkwo was well known throughout the 9 villages and even beyond. His fame rested on solid personal achievements. As a young man of 18, he had brought honor to his village by throwing Amelines the cat. Amelines the cat. Hold on one second. Say! Look, hold on. Give me 1 second, y'all. Okay. All right, here we go. Give me a minute. All right, y'all. Ooh-wee. Okay. I know I don't just be coming prepared and shit. I didn't even expect this phone to let me go. Peace and power, peace and power. All right, here we go. All right. As a young man of 18, he had brought honor to his village by throwing Amelines the cat. Amelines was the great wrestler who for 7 years was unbeaten, from Umuofia to Mbano. He was called the cat because his back would never touch the earth. It was this man that Okonkwo threw in a fight which the old men agreed was one of the fiercest since the founder of their town engaged a spirit of the wild for 7 days and 7 nights. The drums beat and the flutes sang, and the spectators held their breath. Amelines was a wily craftsman, but Okonkwo was as slippery as a fish in water. Every nerve and muscle stood out on their arms, on their backs, their thighs, and one almost heard them stretching to breaking point. In the end, Okonkwo threw the cat. That was many years ago, 20 years or more, and during this time Okonkwo's fame had grown like a bushfire in the Harmattan. He was tall and huge, and his bushy eyebrows and wide nose gave him a very severe look. He breathed heavily, and it was said that when he slept, his wives and children in their houses could hear him breathe. When he walked, his heels hardly touched the ground, and he seemed to walk on springs, as if he was going to pounce on somebody. And he did pounce on people quite often. He had a slight stammer, and whenever he was angry and could not get his words out quickly enough, he would use his fists. He had no patience with unsuccessful men. He had no patience with his father, Unoka, for that was his father's name, Unoka. He had died 10 years ago. In his day, he was lazy and improvident and was quite incapable of thinking about tomorrow. If any money came his way, and it seldom did, he immediately brought gourds of palm wine, called round his neighbors, and made merry. He always said that whenever he saw a dead man's mouth, he saw the folly of not eating what one had had in one's lifetime. Unoka was, of course, a debtor, and he owed every neighbor some money, from a few cowries to quite substantial amounts. He was tall but very thin, and he had a slight stoop. He wore a haggard and mournful look, except when he was drinking or playing on his flute. He was very good on his flute, and his happiest moments were the 2 or 3 moons after the harvest, when the village musicians brought down their instruments, hung over the fireplace. Unoka would play with them, his face beaming with blessedness and peace. Sometimes another village would ask Unoka's band and their dancing egwugwu to come and stay with them and teach them their tunes. They would go to such hosts for as long as 3 or 4 markets, making music and feasting. Unoka loved the good fare and the good fellowship, and he loved this season of the year when the rains had stopped and the sun rose every morning with dazzling beauty. And it was not too hot either, because the cold and dry Harmattan wind was blowing down from the north. Some years the Harmattan was very severe, and a dense haze hung over the atmosphere. Old men and children would then sit around log fires warming their bodies. Unoka loved it all, and he loved the first kites that returned with the dry season, and the children who sang songs of welcome to them. He would remember his own childhood, how he had often wandered around looking for a kite sailing leisurely against the blue sky. As soon as he found one, he would sing with his whole being, welcoming it back from its long, long journey, and asking if it had brought home any lengths of cloth. That was years ago, when he was young. Unoka, the grown-up, was a failure. He was poor, and his wife and children had barely enough to eat. People laughed at him because he was a loafer, and they swore never to lend him any more money because he never paid back. But Unoka was such a man that he always succeeded in borrowing more and piling up his debts. One day, a neighbor called Okoye came in to see him. He was reclining on a mud bed in his hut playing on the flute. He immediately rose and shook hands with Okoye, who then unrolled the goat skin which he carried under his arm and sat down. Unoka went into an inner room and soon returned with a small wooden disc containing a cola nut, some alligator pepper, and a lump of white chalk. "I have cola," he announced when he sat down, and passed the disc over to his guest. "Thank you. He who brings cola brings life, but I think you ought to break it," replied Okoye, passing back the disc. "No, it is for you, I think." And they argued like this for a few moments before Unoka accepted the honor of breaking the cola. Okoye, meanwhile, took the lump of chalk, drew some lines on the floor, and then painted his big toe. As he broke the cola, Unoka prayed to the ancestors for life and health and for protection against their enemies. When they had eaten, they talked about many things, about the heavy rains which were drowning the yams, about the next ancestral feast, and about the impending war with the village of Mbeno. Unoka was never happy when it came to wars. He was in fact a coward and could not bear the sight of blood. And so he changed the subject and he talked about music, and his face beamed. He could hear in his mind's ear the blood-stirring and intricate rhythms of the Ekwe and the Udu and the Ojin, and he could hear his own flute weaving in and out of them, decorating them with a colorful and plaintive tune. The words that we say that you don't understand, I don't understand them either, but it's peace though. By the time we get to the end, we will. It'll be the context clues and the frequency that we hear them. That's actually the easiest way to learn a language, is to practice it, to be around it being practiced. So just go with it. I swear to God. It's how you learned English. Watch. He could hear in his mind's ear the blood-stirring and intricate rhythms of the Ekwu and the Udu and the Ojin. And he could hear his own flute weaving in and out of them, decorating them with a colorful and plaintive tune. The total effect was gay and brisk, but if one picked out the flute as it went up and down and then broke up into short snatches, one saw that there was sorrow and grief there. Okoye was also a musician. He played on the Ojin, but he was not a failure like Unoka. He had a large barn full of yams, and he had 3 wives, and now he was going to take the Idmili title, the 3rd highest in the land. It was a very expensive ceremony, and he was gathering all his resources together. That was, in fact, the reason why he had come to see Unoka. He cleared his throat and began. "Thank you for the kola. You may have heard of the title I intend to take shortly." Having spoken plainly so far, Okoye said the next half a dozen sentences in Proverbs. Among the Igbo, the art of conversation is regarded very highly, and proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten. Okoye was a great talker, and he spoke for a long time, skirting around the subject and then hitting it finally. In short, he was asking Unoka to return the 200 cowries he had borrowed from him more than 2 years before. As soon as Unoka understood what his friend was driving at, he burst out laughing. He laughed loud and long, and his voice rang out clear as the Ojin, and tears stood in his eyes. His visitor was amazed and sat speechless. At the end, Unoka was able to give an answer between fresh outbursts of mirth. "Look at that wall," he said, pointing at the far wall of his hut, which was rubbed with red earth so that it shone. "Look at those lines of chalk," said Okoye. Hold on. "Look at those lines of chalk." And Okoye saw groups of short perpendicular lines drawn in chalk. There were 5 groups, and the smallest group had 10 lines. Unoka had a sense of the dramatic, and so he allowed a pause, in which he took a pinch of snuff and sneezed noisily, and then he continued. "Each group there represents a debt to someone, and each stroke is 100 cowries. You see, I owe that man 1,000 cowries, but he has not come to wake me up in the morning for it. I shall pay you, but not today. Our elders say that the sun will shine on those who stand before it shines on those who kneel under them. I shall pay my big debts first." And he took another pinch of snuff, as if that was paying the big debts first. Okoye rolled his goat skin and departed. When Unoka died, he had taken no title at all, and he was heavily in debt. Any wonder then that his son Okonkwo was ashamed of him? Fortunately, among these people, a man was judged according to his worth and not according to the worth of his father. Okonkwo was clearly cut out for great things. He was still young, but he had won fame as the greatest wrestler in the 9 villages. He was a wealthy farmer and had 2 barns full of yams, and had just married his 3rd wife. To crown it all, he had taken 2 titles and had shown incredible prowess in 2 intertribal wars. And so although Okonkwo was still young, he was already one of the greatest men of his time. Age was respected among his people, but achievement was revered. As the elders said, if a child washed his hands, he could eat with the kings. Okonkwo had clearly washed his hands, and so he ate with kings and elders. And that was how he came to look after the doomed lad who was sacrificed to the village of Umofia by their neighbors to avoid war and bloodshed. The ill-fated lad was called Ikemefuna. All right, that's it. That's chapter 1. Short and sweet, and I'm gonna just keep it right there. Okay. So we know who Okonkwo is. We know him. He's gonna be one of our main characters. We know how revered he is in the 9 villages, 3 wives, well established, unlike his father, Unoka, right? Unoka, who passed away 10 years ago but was a deadbeat and a debtor. Okay. That's peace. I'm going to do this recap again when we start chapter 2. But that's peace. So in closing, it says, Okonkwo had clearly washed his hands, and so he ate with kings and elders. And that was how he came to look after the doomed lad who was sacrificed to the village of Umofia by their neighbors to avoid war and bloodshed. All right, so we're going to learn a little bit more, I'm guessing, when we come back about Ikemefuna, who is this ill-fated lad. All right, that's peace. Things fall apart. Peace.